All right, here we are. We've got some more Cinequest Film Festival fun on the way. I am excited to share a very special conversation I had with director Patrick Shannon, who directed this movie that this conversation is about. You've seen the title of this video, so you know what it is. The film Saints and Warriors. It's a beautiful, inspiring, and impactful film about the Haida clan, which is an indigenous group in British Columbia, and it's about their main team, the Skidegate Saints, and their championship sort of streak, and their the quest to maintain championship status. That's actually one part of the story. The real story, or which I should say, the more impactful story, is while you think it's about basketball, and it is, but really it's bigger than basketball. Basketball is like sort of the launch pad to this other story, which is about the Haida clan and their decades long struggle over ownership of their land. And it's so rich. You have these two stories sort of intertwining. And that alone sets it apart from a lot of other sports documentaries. And it's so weird because you can't really call it a full-on sports documentary. It is that, but really, it's almost like the sport basketball is like it's the hook to get you in. It certainly pulled me in as someone who is a fan of basketball and who plays every day. I try to get out there and shoot some hoops at least once a day. That was the way in. But I think as a writer and someone who's taken by stories of culture and stories of sort of lineage and history, narrative in general, something about this also felt like it went beyond the bounds of what you would normally expect from a story like this. And it's immediately like this legendary something. It had that kind of weight to it. And so that's what kept me really interested, because it's like, oh, there's more to this than just basketball. And how really, for that matter, the sport didn't have to even be basketball. This could have been the same movie with a different sport or another sort of community activity that it's there for the community to build and strengthen relationships, and teaches people about the importance of teamwork, but also how you would use the same skills on a team in a sport in terms of the survival of your clan, the survival of your culture. It's really it was really special. So I enjoyed the film. I watched it and went back, watched it again, watched certain parts again. I was really taken. And so to have the opportunity to speak with Patrick Shannon was really a gift, and to really get his insight on sort of where the film came from, what the genesis of it was, all of that. And then, at some point get really nerdy about some of the technical aspects of that, which is always cool to know about. Again, I enjoyed it. I hope you enjoyed the talk as much as I enjoyed having it. With that, here's the conversation with myself and Patrick Shannon. Enjoy. Have you been enjoying the festival so far? What's been going on there? Are you hanging out in the San Jose area? Like, what's with the screening?
Yeah, based downtown here.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've gone to a couple films so far. We had our premiere a couple days ago, and we're having our final screening later on this afternoon at 4:45.
Awesome.
So yeah, just been getting to meet all these wonderful filmmakers and check out some really good films. So it's been a great experience.
Oh, that's awesome. That's cool. Like I want to tell you, just like getting into this movie, like my way, and I was interested. I was looking, every year before I covered these festivals, I look at some of the what's showing and what looks interesting, and what I might want to catch and cover, or whatever it is. And some of the stuff, and immediately one of the things that drew me to your project is that, obviously as a basketball fan, someone who's played basketball, it's like, okay, way in is like, okay, this is like a basketball documentary or whatever. But what's cool about this is that it's so much more than that. There's like a 1-2 punch of like of storytelling. And I think before I get into the meat of it, I wanted to ask you, just as a product of the Skidegate, the community, like, and how big basketball is there. Did you play? Did you ever play basketball?
I'm 6'3" and I never
Yeah,
played.
no.
No, it's almost like I did it out of spite because like all the kids who picked on me and beat me up when I was young were all the basketball players, and I
Oh,
was one of
yeah,
the artists. I
yeah.
would be
Okay,
hanging
yeah.
out in I was hanging out in the carving shed with the uncles and all that. And so, but it didn't change the fact that basketball is still so foundational for me. Even though I didn't play, it's something that everyone just does. Like my favorite memories with my grandmother are just going to basketball tournaments, and she always had her one spot in the bleachers. I would always go with her to or travel out to the big basketball tournaments. So yeah, even though I never played, it was always a part of my life.
I can relate. I obviously I have a family of basketball players, so there was a time, I was young, really young, and I loved it, and then I went through a phase where I'm an artist, the artsy person, to the
Mhm.
where I didn't want to play as much, and then people in the family, you got to play. There's like pressure to now play,
Yeah. Oh yeah.
live up to your family and your dad, whoever else is like, your grandfathers all played, and then you go to this phase of rebellion a little bit where you don't want to play, and there's like these discussions around
Mhm.
like, no, I want to do my own thing, I'm going to do something.
Yeah.
For that, but I think one of the things that um having played like in school and stuff like that, and recognizing sort of the importance. I wonder if you've seen this too throughout your process of making this movie about like what basketball or even like team sports in general, what that can teach a young person. Because oftentimes it feels like it's less about the actual game and more about what the the sport can teach you about life and like responsibilities and time
Oh.
and all these things. And some of the threads that sort of came up, I think that hit me from watching your documentary, like it's like for the culture, it's basketball is a big thing, but
Mhm.
it's also more about it's about the survival of the culture. It's about the the community and stuff. And I'm wondering
Mhm.
if you could speak to whether or not that's something you felt growing up, even though you didn't play as
Mhm.
sort of the energy was that sort of present enough.
Oh, 100%. It's something that, you know, when you're, I was raised in like the reserve in the 90s and 2000s, and back then it was pretty rough, just like a lot of indigenous reserves across Canada and reservations across the US. There's so much trauma that has come out of the near extinction of our people. Pair that with the policies and residential schools and children being taken away and all these laws that were meant to outlaw who you were as a human being. And so, as a result, especially in the 90s and 2000s, things were actually pretty rough. And, there wasn't a lot to look forward to for a lot of us growing up there. And, if you didn't escape like the res, like didn't go down south to the city, like you weren't considered like of having any potential. And so, basketball, I think, has played a role of being that light in the community where it's something that's healthy for people to do. It's something that brings us together. It's something that, especially for us, connects us to our culture in such a deep way because it was used as a tool to keep cultural practices going. It is where like our big house where we have our big cultural celebrations and ceremonies, potlatches, is our basketball gym. So it's very common for us to be able to bring song and dance and all of this beauty of our culture onto the basketball court. And so growing up with that, since we built this gym in the 1960s, just volunteer, the community just coming together and building this basketball gym, it's become the central force of keeping the culture front and center in everyday lives for people. And pair, like, yeah, when you pair the fact that it's sport, it allows people to have a healthy physical outlet. You get to learn to work with other people, and it gives you an opportunity to access culture in a way that you might not on a regular day-to-day basis get access to it. Just the people you're around, the space that you're in, the activities that happen. And one of our interviews, he is a former vice president of the Haida Nation, who is part of one of our biggest victories that we had as a nation back in the 80s, Arnie Bellis. He said that at one point on the BC coast, all of the indigenous leadership and all like there's over 40, 50 different nations just in British Columbia alone on the coast, like all of the leadership stemmed from basketball. Like you learn to gather, you learn to work together, you learn to pull for a common goal, and that really helped us in our fight for sovereignty to get recognition of our land and title from the Canadian government.
There's a thread. There was a section I think that just reminded me of what I think what that I think Desi was talking about around. Um, there's the conversation around whether or not certain players would come back to play for the Saints. When you're younger, there's a thread like you're going to make something of yourself, and then there's an area of like once you're out there, you're moving away from your culture in certain ways. Certain other things feel more important when you're young. When you get older, you start realizing, oh, actually, this, that's cool, but my culture and my people, there's something special here. I want to go back and do that. I don't know. That resonated because I know that was my experience also, like personally, feeling like there was a sense of like, there's something more like outside of my culture that I can get, and then I get older, I'm going, oh, there's something. The power is here. Like the. I'm wondering, did you personally had you experienced that as a younger person?
I definitely resonated with that aspect of the story. When I look at someone like Jesse Barnes, it would have been so
Yeah,
easy for this like young mid-20s player who's like very successful at what he does at basketball, go to the city, choose to play for the rival team. Like it's so easy to view someone like that as like that's his heel turn. He's the villain in this story, but I never saw him as a villain because I did the exact same thing, and a lot of Haidas do that. Like I was sent down to Vancouver when I was about 15. And then I started working in the film industry about a year and a half later, the Vancouver film industry. And I spent 10 years in the city. Like I got these different opportunities. And it wasn't till 2013 that I moved back to my home community up on Skidegate. And that was because I saw the health of my grandmother really start to deteriorate. And so I moved home to be her primary caregiver. And, when I was in the city, I struggled quite a bit on a personal and cultural level because, I was raised on this reserve. I knew exactly who I was. I knew who my family was. There was no question of my identity as a Haida person or my place within it. But as soon as I went to the city and didn't have any family, I didn't have any community, I didn't have any culture, I felt like this huge part of who I am was just missing and gone. And so I only had half of me existing in the city. And, being white passing also basically made it so I didn't even have any visual connection to my people. And so my identity as an Indigenous person was pretty much fully erased. No one would recognize me or accept me as Indigenous down in the city there. And it wasn't until I moved back home that I really truly connected with my culture and my community in a much stronger way than I even had growing up. And it's something that was always a part of like me wanting to get out, especially as a storyteller, but I didn't feel like I had the foundations or place or confidence even in myself because a decade of having my identity be, essentially erased. It took years for me to build that back up, moving to my home community and being engaged and working within my clan and my culture in important roles. And now I feel like I'm confident because not only have I moved back to my home community, but the work that I do as a filmmaker has brought me to over 100 different Indigenous communities across the world. And being able to work with other nations, other cultures has made me feel even more affirmed in who I am in my culture, but also what's so beautiful and special about our culture. So I don't take it for granted anymore like I did as a kid. It's something that I'm so proud of, and I want to shout it out from the mountaintops. And I guess I'm doing that through this film.
yeah. That's so because that's a great segue. That actually was going to be my first question about like so the importance of this particular story. This was a story that I hadn't heard before. Like I hadn't heard a
Mhm.
story about from Indigenous perspectives. Like it's felt like the secret story. Well, the other story
Mhm.
about fighting for Indigenous lands and stuff. What would you say was the germ of the of wanting to tell this particular story? Like
Yeah. Well, it's something that, I've always known was a story that I thought was so important that needed to be told, and it was never told by anyone else in a way that really encapsulated what I wanted to. Because for me, like, yeah, the basketball is an important part of it, but I'm not in it for the basketball per se. I'm in it for the people and the culture and all of the work that the Haida people are doing. Basketball has just been a tool and a vehicle to a much larger end, which is getting our communities healthy enough to a point where we can have success in not only managing ourselves in a healthy, good way, culturally, economically, government wise, but also in the greater battle for our lands and titles, because we are the true stewards to Haida Gwaii. We never lost a war. We never gave up our inherent right and title to these lands that we've been at for over 14,000 years. And when we all look at the devastation that Canada has brought upon the lands, from the logging to the fishing to the resource extraction, just destroying, like, Canada has proven that it is not capable of stewarding these lands in a way that is responsible or respectful. And so we see it as a responsibility, not only for our own cultural pride and perseverance, but also for the protections of these lands, which no one else is going to stand up for what's right, except the indigenous peoples who have a long-standing connection to these lands. And so yeah, it's something that I actually kind of forget the beginning of your question there, but it's yeah, I think about the role that basketball has really played, and yeah, it's so much bigger than just the sport. The sport's amazing. The sport's fun. It brings so much to the table, but it's the bigger implications that really inspired me. And when this story, like the genesis of it, yeah, the team's amazing. Like they're legendary. They're like the Chicago Bulls of the 90s,
Right.
but for Indigenous
Yeah,
basketball.
exactly.
Uh, and like that's an amazing story just in its own
Yeah.
right. And then, oh, wait a second, we have our three top young players defecting to the all-star team in the city. That's also a really great story. Then you've got the story of resilience and survival when our entire people were almost exterminated by disease, brought down to like less than 600 people. And that's a powerful story in its own right. Then you go into all the policies and 100 years of oppression trying to exterminate us as a culture and people. And then you pair that with what's happening now, this like phoenix rising from the ashes resurgence. It's just like all of it just came together in a way that I could not have. Like, I knew in my heart that this was the story. I didn't know how we were going to get there. I knew all the, like, basically, I was running on vibes for this. I had a belief that this story was going to come together in the right way. As long as we put our best foot forward, we do this in the right way, and we're there and ready and prepared to capture it. And like, if we shot this film a year earlier or a year later, it would be nowhere near the film it is now, because all of these things come together with the victory um, to get our title recognized by the province of British Columbia and the Canadian government, to all this like the stories of the diaspora of Haida's moving away, and then that relationship. Like, there's so many different threads that just were able to be woven together in a way that I couldn't be happier with.
That's one of the things I love about this project because I've worked on documentaries myself and I know that like certain things have to like you can't plan for everything. The way things had to work out so perfectly that you be at the games and like you get stuff like to have it fall into place in the way it does. It's just like it feels like it was sort of preset. Like okay, they
Yeah.
might do this, but you know anybody who knows documentaries that's not you have to sort of kind of go with the energy
Yeah.
that's there and which leads me to the other question about it, like about because you had this idea and all these pieces and these threads.
Mhm.
What was the writing process like? How did you and the team come up with like which pieces to focus on when and how what were the conversations like around how to make that
Yeah.
thread
Well,
sense?
so for me, I cast a really, really wide net. I thought of because like I have a good understanding of who are the key players, and we brought in other local community members to help flesh out like who are the people that we have in the community who would be really good mouthpieces to these different aspects of it. And like we did over 45 interviews, and
Yeah.
maybe only a dozen ended up in the film.
Wow.
Um,
Yeah.
and there's like so many storylines because like we don't barely even get to touch on the northern village on Haida Gwaii, Old Masset, which is our big rivals, and then Heidelberg up in Alaska, and the women's team, and like the
Yeah.
other championship teams of the 2000. Like there's so many storylines that just weren't able to make it. So we just had to capture a wide net of amazing stories, and thankfully we've gotten the green light from our streamer up in Canada, who's going to be broadcasting this in the winter, to do a series of online extra short films. So we've got a series of
Oh,
5 to 12 minute shorts that are covering all these different areas of the story that couldn't make it into the focused feature, but will be part of basically like the bigger cinematic universe of Haida basketball. Um, but as far as like what storylines, like we go in, I always knew from the beginning that Desi was going to be a central figure within this. So when I did early development about 2 years ago, I did early interviews with Desi and Jason, and a little bit of that footage ended up in the film. So from the very beginning, years ago of this project, I've had Desi and Jason as key people in mind. And as we kept on going, like I knew we're going to center around them. They welcomed us in. We're working with them from the very beginning. They helped guide us in like who are certain people we should be talking to, what are elements of the story
Yeah.
that, especially on the sovereignty side, that needs to be captured. Because Jason, as the president, he wanted to make sure that this story was being represented in a good way. So we made sure to take guidance and deference to direction that he thought the story should go in certain areas, or at least things that should be covered. And
Yeah.
then it was up to me and my team to make sure that when we are identifying people like Arnie Bellis, not only was he the coach of the Haida Nation team, but he was the vice president of the Haida Nation. He was during at the blockades in 1987. And so making sure that when I was asking these questions, that they were going to touch on all these points that we really want to hit. And then, yeah, so really the writing process was just in my head and knowing that these are going to intersect in some way. So I need to make sure I get basic coverage on the questions that are genuine and authentic, but that make sure they speak to these important parts because I know all these people. Like these are people I was raised with. So I feel it would be more difficult if I wasn't so integrated within this community and into these relationships. So it actually made it a lot easier. So the writing process was mostly me knowing who these people are and being able to ask the questions that helped guide the answers out that I knew would be used in a way that could tell the story.
Oh, that's fantastic. You mentioned some of some of the specific people you reached out to, like to talk in this documentary. One of my favorite people who's in this documentary is Nika Carlson.
Oh,
She she's easily like to me. She felt like the glue that sort of held together a lot of the sort of on the historical side, like making sure like the. I'm just curious about like if you can speak to what her contribution
yeah.
means to this project. It felt like she just really did like it was just like
Oh, yeah.
oh just giving them like
I knew from the very beginning that Nika had to be an important part of this film. So Nika is my cousin, and
oh
she's been involved in a bunch of my stuff. Like she was this kind of voice for another episode of a TV show I directed called Stuff the British Stole that had a whole episode centered on Haida Gwaii. And she's so eloquent. She was present at a lot of these big events since the 1980s. She's written books on them. She's the executive director of the museum. She's just a wealth of knowledge and a pillar of the community. And I knew that to not only add the context for the story that we needed, she brought a validity to the voices, especially for our own community. So, like when Nika talks, people listen. And so, just knowing that she was an important part for our own people to see this and feel good about it. Um, and that we can feel confident that what she says is going to not only be accurate, but she's going to be so genuine and authentic in how she says it and what she says for the outside world. So, yeah, Nika for me was like an instant. I knew before we ever started filming that she had to be a strong voice for us. She represents strong Haida women. She's seen everything. She understands the large context, especially as a museum curator who's been a part of helping reshape and reclaim Haida narratives that have been stolen away by museums and other media entities. So, like, making sure to have that voice was so crucial in this.
yeah, she was amazing. I felt a different weight, a weight of to like an outside audience's understanding of everything in the mix of from for the historical aspect, from understanding the weight of the culture, and it was just like, oh yeah, we she's a yeah, that's a
Yeah.
key.
Mhm.
There's this other element I wanted to springboard from that. There's a lot in this movie that really it speaks to like oh look this is a people that's resilient that's still here after all this like trauma and all this stuff and of course personally that of course obviously that resonates personally and I'm wondering if you could talk about having a project like this as a as a sort of like example of like yo this is here and this is just to show like it's a reminder that we're here we're still here and also to the outside world like yo this is there's something special important about this
Mhm.
like pay attention like what does that
Yeah.
mean looking for you
Oh, well, I feel like that's my role as a storyteller
Yeah.
from this community is like it's my responsibility to use my skill sets, just like a carver's responsibility is to create beautiful poles and commemorations of our culture where we're at this point in time. I feel like that's my responsibility as a filmmaker is to make sure that this moment in time and the moments leading up to this that haven't been fully captured are being preserved and shared, not just for the outside world to learn and build empathy and want to work with us, but also for the generations of Haidas who haven't heard these stories. Like so many of these stories I had never heard. Like, like for example, the big stand on Othli Gwai, I had just known about it growing up. Like like just it's a thing that happened. We knew it was an important thing that happened. I didn't know the major significance of it till very recently. And so I mentioned I'm one of two Haida filmmakers doing our directorial debuts right now. The other is Chris Octor, who just debuted his film in the USA at Big Sky a few weeks ago called The Stand, which is a whole documentary that's all verite, just from archival, about that stand on Asli Gwai from 1985 to 1987 that culminated in like this massive victory that really set the Haida Nation up for success in all of our political victories going forward. And you see like a 5 minute segment in the film that covers that, but this is a whole feature. And I didn't know anything about really that stand. Chris didn't even know much about that stand. That's why he went forward with this project. Tremendous film. But, like I found out recently that my mom as a teenager was at that logging protest and she got arrested. Like she was one of the 72
Oh,
arrests.
oh wow.
And I had no idea about that. She never spoke about it. No one else really speaks about it. And so, like, there's all these parts, pivotal moments in our history that an entire generation just did not know about. And I know, like, when I put together a film like this with our amazing team, that this is going to be a historical piece that's going to be referenced and looked back at for generations to come to remind us all of these powerful things that we have accomplished in spite of all of this trauma and all of these, things working against us, especially colonization. Like
Yeah.
we're down to our last three fluent speakers of our language in Haida and Skidegate. And because English is so dominant, and we're trying to get back to it as much as we can, but English is the trade language. It's the language that you see on everything. And like there have been a lot of strides and like work done by amazing people to try and push it forward. But we're in crisis time right now in so many different areas of our culture. Like when you have the population loss of 99% of us being wiped out, pair that with the laws that Canada instituted to ban our culture and make it illegal to gather, to sing, to dance, to do anything like that for so long. Like we didn't even get the vote until the 1960s. Like indigenous rights mirrored so much of the African American civil rights movement and timing and all that. Yeah, it's like up until way sooner than most people like to admit, it was like legal to kill Native people. Like I just heard stories like I'm in San Jose right now, and I just heard the story of like the missions, the California missions,
Right.
and them coming up, and how like a big part of that was having to exterminate the indigenous populations. And so this history is all across this entire continent. And what I'm hoping a film like this does is open the eyes to all the viewers of like, oh, wait a second. We need to understand the histories of these lands that we currently live on, but also know that the present day story is still going on with these peoples, that we aren't just a historical fact that had happened, but we're still a present day people and we're actively fighting against the extermination of our culture. It may not be legal anymore to kill us, but all the practices, all the policies, all the pressures of Western colonial English American Canadian society is still weighing on us right now. And so we're just trying to navigate this in a way that we can hold on, not only hold on to what we have, but adapt it to this new world. And I feel like when I look at things like sport, like basketball, it plays that role. It's a vehicle to help us continue that resilience when everything's going against you. So Yeah, I feel like it's so important for a film like this to be here, not just for us, but for everyone else to
Yeah.
watch.
Yeah, I felt the exact same way, and I thought this is important. It's important that this film exists, first of all, and it's important that it's like, oh, people need to see this. And I'm like, oh, I'm glad that this is like the like basketball might have been my hook into
Mhm.
like, okay, what's this about? I want to see what's going on. And but as also as a writer myself, the narrative and like the sort of the underpinnings of like what this is actually about is like is another thing that's super interesting to me. Like I want to know, okay,
Mhm.
what's the deeper
Mhm.
thread? What are the different threads that are sort of intertwining what's here? Which is a segue to my next question about the it's there. There's like sort of two major sort of stories with the like with the basketball, with the tournament, and then
Mhm.
the fight for native land. And I'm wondering, what can you speak to some of the what were the challenges in sort of braiding those two
Mhm.
major storyline? Were there any challenges? Was it easier to weave those things?
Yeah, well, it's something that was all done in the edit because when we started shooting, we had no idea that the title battle was going to come to a head in the middle of our shooting.
Yeah, yeah,
We didn't know, like it had been ongoing, like the negotiations for over 20 years happening in the background, and we knew that there was going to be movement on it at some point, but we had no clue that at the same time that we're filming, that all these tournaments are happening in the background, that this was like actually moving quickly.
yeah.
And 2 months after the tournament ended, like this signing, the premier of British Columbia came up to Haida to Skidegate to our gym where we play basketball and signed over recognition of title. And so that was one of two big dominoes to fall. That was huge. And the second was the federal government, the Canadian government needed to recognize our title. And we thought this was going to be a massive battle, but because of the way that was done, the momentum that we had, it moved so quickly that just 3 weeks ago, the Canadian government and recognized our title with Prime Minister Justin Trudeau flying to Skidegate, going to our basketball gym, and signing recognition of Haida like inherent title and sovereignty to our land. So the Canadian government and the provincial government are two big battles that we've been fighting for 50 years since we created our government, finally came through to fruition. And so, yeah, the Haida Nation is the first Indigenous nation in all of our Canada to truly get land back.
Right. Yeah, that's major. Like it's major the level of
Yeah.
like and how it just like it sort of like fell into place that was not like
Yeah.
you couldn't have
And
known what.
And so as soon as we got wind that this was moving quickly, of course, like we were keeping, we're touching base with Jason because he's
Yeah.
still like well
Yeah.
trained for basketball and in between tournaments having to fulfill his role as the president of the Haida Nation. And so we're just staying in close contact with Jason and getting updates that, oh, there's this big meeting happening and like, can we go in and film it? So we go in and we film these sessions. And then like just having to be ready to capture these moments. And so the whole title story really came together in the edit because we started post-production and editing 2 weeks into principal photography. Actually, no, yeah, like 3 weeks into principal photography because we started shooting in mid-December 23 and started editing the second week of January. And so we're editing and
Right.
our amazing editing team was like putting together assemblies of sections of the film as we're going. So the first cut of the film, like the rough cut of the film, was probably completed within 3 months of like the film being shot, like 2 months of the film, like
Wow.
principal ending. And so as we're filming, I was seeing how the story was starting to shape up, and that gave me the ability to like re-identify we need to pick up shit with this guy. And this is where my producer Michael came in amazing because not only was he producing, but he was also a story editor to help with this as well. And so we would identify together that we need to do a pickup interview with this guy because we didn't touch on it in this one. So we came back and we did multiple interviews. And so it was great to be shooting and editing at the same time. So we're able to adapt the cut to make sure that the story was able to weave together. Because it's not like we went and shot and then we went away for a year or two and edited. We were editing and shooting at the same time that this is all happening. And the film was probably 75% finished by a couple months after Principal was wrapped.
Wow, that's yeah. See, that's one of the things that I was curious about. Like, man, how did you like? It's which is it makes it's cooler too. Like this, like that you were shooting and editing at the same time. How do you stay nimble when stuff is moving and
Mhm.
shooting as you're actually shooting and as you're like having to catch up and trying to stay on top of like new
Mhm.
elements and things to. It's like that's the wow, that I'm like that. I was like, well, how the heck did you how did you know that this was going to be the it's in the way like with the title, the fight for that, like this decades long title. It's a great. It feels like, oh, that's the perfect way to end this particular this. It's like, oh, they this a whole bunch of stuff happened, and then finally after all these years,
The
and
big, yeah. Because at the end of the day, like the Saints lose in the film.
yeah,
Like they lose their champion. They don't defend their championship. And like I was thinking, I'm sitting there in the gym and it looked like the Saints were going to win. Then all of a sudden they weren't. And so I'm
right.
sitting there, it's the last few minutes, and it's just like, they're not going to win this. What does this mean for the film?
Boom, yeah,
And
right,
I'm
yeah, yeah, like
and I'm sitting there thinking like I'm stressed out because of the game, but then also like thinking in my head like how like where do we go from this? Like what do we do with this? Um, and I think it made it even stronger of a film to have the loss because it's showing that transition. Like this is the end of the dynasty. Because if they had just won again, like I would have been so happy for them and our whole community would love it. But as a story, as a film, it has like a nice, neat bow where you get to close up character arcs. And something that I love about what we're able to do with this is that each of our main characters gets a character arc
yeah,
that gets resolved. So there's not really anything hanging. And even with the boys basketball program, they got to the finals and they lost by 3 points. They lost by one three-pointer that just missed as a buzzer
right.
beater. And so it's like that's two losses in a row. It's just like, oh man, like this is rough. Like you're still inspired by the work and resilience. But then the third battle, which is the title, and that's a victory. So it's like loss, loss, but third time's a charm. And that was bringing the bigger victory and battle home.
Yeah, that was what I completely agree because I said the same thing. I thought, well, in a different story, it would have been about the Saints and whether or not they win the game like that. And that's the story. The gut punch, like the impact that you're left with
Mhm,
is, oh, this is a larger battle that's won for the community, for the nation as a whole.
mhm,
Like this is a that's major. That and the idea that basketball as a springboard for this other larger fight is like
mhm,
same things you learn in the team are the same things you use in the
mhm.
community in the nation. Those are the same things that were drawn upon to for that title fight. That's a whole different story that you wouldn't have. Another sports documentary would have done something different.
I think that's what makes this film special because I've seen so many basketball documentaries and sports documentaries, and it's like, yeah, they're inspiring, powerful stories, but at the end of the day, it's just like, okay, they won or they lost, and they'll try again next year.
Right.
And it's like, sure, like Haida basketball is going to continue on, but that for me was never the point of this story. That was an amazing not only hook to get people in who might not otherwise sit down for a film about Indigenous history and sovereignty, which is a very niche thing. But yeah, it also adds like a really fun wow pop factor to it because like when I was sitting at the screening here a couple days ago, we're at the back, and during like the last game between Skidegate and Burnaby, like I heard the audience every single time it went in slow motion and like they missed a free
Yeah.
throw. I just like I heard
Yeah.
gasps and I heard groans, and it's just like yeah, that's you get emotionally on the edge of your seat, and that's like that's I feel like for me, the stories that impact me the most are the ones that are able to weave together things that are exciting, that are fun, that are poppy, but then also have a depth and a heart to it. Because, I love documentary, but sometimes it can be a bit slow or meditative, is what we say in
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
industry.
That's a turn. Yeah. Yeah. That's a
And
turn.
you know what? It puts a lot of work on your behalf to draw the emotion out of something or to really relate. But I feel like it's so easy to feel excited and to feel heartbroken for these people because you feel along for the ride. Like my goal is like I want people to feel like they're like in Skidegate, they're on Haida Gwaii, they're with us through this journey. And by welcoming the world into our community through these stories, through these journeys that and these struggles, that we can build an empathy that helps build the relationships beyond the film in real life as well.
Like it felt like, it was like a, like Rocky, and like the first Rocky film, Rocky
Mhm.
win that fight, but he does win. Like he knows, hey, I went up against the champ and I gave my all, and I was
Yeah.
pretty good. Like it's like you did,
And he got his community behind him. He got the
yeah, right. The
classic
whole
ending
right. They're
run with
all
the
yeah. How hard or easy was it to get into those rooms?
oh, it was pretty easy. Because like like everyone trusts me in the community. Like
Yeah.
I live in this village. Everyone knows who I am. Like it's not tough. Like, oh, Patrick's, filming this basketball documentary. Everyone was excited about it. Like the whole community knew it was happening, and everyone was so jazzed that like a film like this is being made. And so yeah, like everyone was so welcoming. Like I'd call up people like, hey, do you want to be in the film? They're like, shit, yeah, we do.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
also, like, Jason not only is the president and the captain of the team, but we also, because he played such an important role in helping not only guide elements of the sovereignty story, but also like help us get access to everything. So he's recognized as an executive producer on the film. And so, it really helps to have the president of the Haida Nation in your
Yeah.
corner when you want to
Yeah.
get into these meetings. Yeah, it's funny. Like it was an all-indigenous crew, with the exception of one of our local cam ops, Gaetan, and then our producer Michael. And the running joke was that we always have to have a token white guy on set just in case we need to talk
Yeah.
to the
Yeah.
cops.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Right. Helps make things run a little bit smoother, right? Just to have just
Yeah.
someone's like, okay, they're okay.
Oh,
What
the,
they got
the police are rolling up. Michael, you go talk to
I
him.
go talk to them. Yeah. So, Mr. Shannon, one of my last questions I want to get to. This is more nerdy, like more on the technical as a lover of this stuff, and it was one of the reasons why I wanted to. It's like I always enjoy having these conversations with people who are in it and they were making the stuff. And like I'm curious, so what's some of the tech that you guys use? Like what were some of the cameras that you use to shoot?
Mhm. Yeah, so we actually did quite a hybrid thing. So I shot almost all of the early development stuff myself.
Yeah.
So I just used a series of like, Panasonic Lumix S5 II. I had a Fujifilm XH2S, like in early development stuff. Then we brought on, and like, so this was a film that had two DPs. We had co-cinematographers,
Yeah.
like two amazing DPs. We had Sean Stiller, who's based out of Toronto, excellent Indigenous DP. He's Sequetmic. Then you also have Michael Borquin, who's an amazing DP based out of Northern British Columbia. He's Taltan. Both of them use different camera systems, and they weren't excited about the idea of jumping onto each other's
Yeah.
system. So Mike uses Sony, and Sean uses Canon, and the systems weren't able
They
to,
don't,
like,
yeah, they
they're
don't,
not
yeah.
going to cross over. And
Right.
so we knew that we want them to feel comfortable with what they're going to have. They're also most likely going to be their own A and B units. They'll come together on certain shoots. And so we just had to work with our colorist early on. So we established that relationship with Dave at Elemental Post, and we worked with him to develop special LUTs in all the
Oh,
different situations, because we're going to be shooting outside, and each gym has its own color temperature. And so making sure that all of our camera systems were going to be able to cross-cut very well together. We worked with our colorist to make sure each camera, because we used I think four different Sony cameras and then one Canon camera for our main production shoot, and we made sure that each one had its own dedicated LUT for each type of scenario that we can jump between. And so that was the main setup. And we had two sound operators, really fantastic. We have Peter Robinson, amazing sound guy. He came up and he did second unit sound. And then we also had Ramsey Borquin, who is Michael Borquin, this DP's brother. And
oh
he's
wow.
one of the top sound guys in the country. And so, yeah, it was really awesome to have this whole team. And so just between like them and a couple of our local shooters, like we were able to capture so much. We probably captured at least 60 terabytes of footage in those 4 months. And so we had an amazing assistant editor, Darian Lung, who was with us from the very beginning. And like during the tournaments, we actually flew him up on location to Prince Rupert, where he had his own little back room and he was constantly doing DIT work. People, like, we'd have our production assistants running cards to him, and he was logging everything. He was creating proxies, sending that to our lead editor down in Vancouver. And we were just like cranking it out as quick as possible for an efficient machine. And even our editing, we had an editing team of two lead editors and then an assistant editor on this. Because our lead editor, Greg Ng, he's absolutely amazing. He is a tremendous editor. He actually had to step away a couple months into editing because he had to go edit a feature, Long Lakes. Um,
Oh. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
And and so like we got him doing like assemblies of like the really punchy basketball stuff, and he did such an amazing job with that. He has such an eye, and he's a musician as well, so such a great ear for music. And so a lot of the original music that he was able to put together and cut together, those are all in their entirety in the film as it stands. Like his rough assembly is like a second draft or a second cut for a
Yeah.
lot of other editors. And then he had to step away, and so we brought in another editor, Hart Snyder, who's a tremendous Vancouver-based editor who's done a lot of really great work. But he's really great at, really mining the emotion and the story. And so I think it was a really cool approach to have two editors tag off and handle different parts of the film, and then because they're different types of narratives and stories, so he really focused a lot on the historical and the cultural and the personal relationships, where Greg really got a lot of the basketball and the on location stuff and some of the verite that was going on. And we're able to bring them all together and, merge them. So Greg came back on for a little bit towards the end. And then we had Darian, who ended up getting us over the finishing line as a finishing editor over the final 6 months. So we really had three editors on the project all working together cohesively. And like we all got to screen the film together and early cuts of it. So you have all like three editors plus producer and me. And then, yeah, so it was a fascinating process. It went by so quick, it was so efficient.
Wow.
What took the longest was like we pretty much completed 90% of the film in 6 months from shooting to post.
Yeah, which
And
is
then the next 6 months was basically just community feedback, because we wanted to make sure this film went to the community, had feedback from some of the key characters to make sure everything was being done appropriately and that people felt good about it. So that was another 6 month process. And we wanted to make sure that, and this is something that was sometimes challenging, but I think overall so important, was I um, I gave up final cut to some of our core people involved in the process in the community, because I wanted to make sure the community signed off on this,
yeah,
and that it's not just my story. Yes, I'm directing it, but this is the community story and it needed to be done that way. So I didn't actually have final cut. I got us to final cut.
right.
Um, but at the end of the day, it was the community that got final cut. And so uh, that was quite the process. And I'm very glad we did it the way we did, because now I can feel good about this, and know that it's going to pass the anti-test.
Wow, that's just yeah, which is such a it's such a process. That's like, oh man, which thank you by the way for answering that, 'cause that's a it's a whole other area of like would not necessarily be known about what it takes to make a film like this. The idea of making a film is it's a community sort of thing. To the audience
Yeah.
coming in and you want to be you're being open to different suggestions. Forget all
Yeah, it's like some people consider themselves auteurs, but I find often those people are assholes.
yeah, yeah.
It's like, come on, like filmmaking is a collaborative process. And if you're not willing to be collaborative, if you're not willing to take in suggestions, then it's like you're gonna be limited. You're gonna have a ceiling on how powerful this film can be. And this was a film that, it yeah, it was something that I spearheaded. It was a story I felt passionate about, but it's not my story. It's our story, and it needed to make sure that it was the community that owned it.
It's like the truest representation of what that is of
Yeah. So
all
like having Nika also be able to view it early on and help guide us certain things that we should maybe reconsider or remove or add. And same thing with Jason and Desi. They both all had their input.
yeah.
I think the biggest challenge was like for them to be able to work through their own objectivity, because they're subjects of the film. And I can only imagine how difficult that was for them. But like I think they did a really good job. And yeah, I'm really pleased with how this came out.
Yeah, it's an amazing film, I think. And so one last question. This is another nerdy one. There's one shot in this movie that I loved. I loved a lot of the visuals of this movie, but there was one shot of like the water, like at night. Like,
Yeah.
was that shot achieved? The lighting and was that like I was like, it's not a stock shot. This is not like something pulled from somewhere else. Like, how the heck did you guys get? How did you get that shot?
That is all the magic of our editor Greg Ng. This is an early one he did,
Wow.
and that was actually stock footage.
It was stock footage. I was
And
like,
it was not only stock footage, it was daytime ocean footage that
oh, that was
he color processed like day for night.
That's it.
and
Oh, that's
paired it together. It's like I was blown away by what he was able to do. Like I actually thought that's what our cinematographer Sean shot on the ferry.
yeah.
No, that was just like an amazing piece of editing that our editor pulled together.
That's what I was like. Because my first I was like, this is amazing. How'd they get this? This cannot be stock footage. It's not stock. There's no way it's stock footage. It's like so. It's like that's amazing. Like the work that went into that. That's yeah. It's a fantastic shot. It's a great transition from
Mhm.
trip to the tournament. Cuts
Yeah, and it's also a transition point. Like even like working with our colorist, so we spent a week in the coloring room and just going through the intention of each thing, creating a look for each
yeah,
sequence of the film. Like everything on Haida is very warm and rich, especially in the gym. It's got very warm casts and tones to everything. Then you go through that water, like I almost think of it almost like a portal. You're taking this ferry through
yeah,
this
yeah,
portal to this tournament. Everything cools right down. The gym has a very cool, almost sterile tone at points because you're not in warm, friendly home territory anymore.
yeah.
And it transitions back and forth between things. So we really wanted to make sure that the color was subtle enough that you wouldn't notice it. But when you actually look at stills of the film and you put them together, like, oh wow, these sections are really, really warm and these are really, really cool. And just finding what works best.
Wow. Yeah. It's yeah. Well, it worked really well, and I just this yeah. I have to just congratulate you, commend you on a great film. It's an important film. I'm glad it's here at Cinequest. And can you talk a little bit like just where else is the film going? Is after it leaves Cinequest, will it be? Is there another festival it's going to hit, or is
Oh
there?
yeah, there's a lot of festivals lining up,
Oh,
and
good, good. That's good.
since our big world premiere a few weeks ago in Montana, we've gotten a lot of invitations from a bunch of festivals that have now heard about it, and we're waiting to hear back from a whole
Oh,
bunch of others. But we were just this week able to announce our big Canadian premiere at one of the top documentary film festivals in the world, Hot Docs. So
oh,
we're having a big Canadian premiere. There's going to be a big celebration party there. It's April 28th at 5 p.m. at the TIFF Bell Lightbox. So it's going to be, I think it's going to be our biggest screening. Like they gave us a really, really big theater and it's going to be promoted. It's one of Hot Docs' 8 special presentations during the festival. So we were announced on March 11th, and the rest of the films don't get announced for another couple more weeks. So yeah, it's definitely going to be a big one.
that's major. Yeah. Oh, you were just announced like this is this week. Like just like
Yeah.
they made the announcement. That's well, congratulations.
Yeah. Thank you.
That's a super yeah, that's great.
Yeah, and we have more information like on our website, saintsandwarriors.com. People can go there, they can see where it's screening, if there'll be online. It's going to be online in Canada on our streaming service Crave. That's Canada's like premier streaming service.
Yeah.
So yeah, they're a partner with this from the very beginning. They help fund it. So yeah, we're looking to see if we can get this film with US and international distribution. That's our goal, coming
Yeah.
to places like Cinequest.
Thank you for sticking around and watching this conversation. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Special thanks again to Patrick Shannon. Thank you for your time. Karen Oberman for helping set the interview up and help me get set up with the film and stuff. So thank you for that. Yeah, stay tuned. More stuff's coming up. More reviews, more videos. Keep an eye out. Speaking of which, I'm off to go see another movie at the festival. So I'll be back. Catch you later.